Anxiety does not appear to destroy you. It appears because there is a truth inside you that has been neglected for too long. Maybe you cannot name it, but you feel it very clearly. One morning you wake up, your chest feels heavy as if a stone is pressing down on it. Not exactly pain, just hard to breathe. Your mind starts to run, not in any specific direction, just running, as if it stops something will come crashing in. You check your phone, read a few news headlines, reply to a few messages, trying to pull yourself into the familiar rhythm of a normal day. Everything is still there, work, responsibilities, polite conversations, and you still play your role well. You smile, you nod, you say that you are fine. But there is one very real thing you do not say. Inside you, something is stretching tighter and tighter, like a rope pulled for too long without anyone allowing it to loosen. There is no clear reason, no major incident. Life, from the outside, is even considered fine, and because of that, anxiety confuses you even more. You begin to wonder if you are weak, if you are overreacting, or if there's something wrong with you. You try all the familiar methods, deep breathing, positive thinking, telling yourself that everything will be fine. Sometimes it softens a little, but then it returns, like a shadow clinging to you, even when there is no light. Anxiety is not loud, it does not scream, it whispers, and it is that whispering that exhausts you, because no one around you hears it. And slowly, you stop trying to explain. The scariest thing about anxiety is not the feeling of fear. It is the feeling of being separated from yourself. You live, but as if you are standing half a step outside your own body. You do everything right, but you do not feel truly present. There are moments when you are talking to someone, but inside, there is only one question repeating over and over: why am I like this? Carl Jung, someone who is never in a hurry with the human soul, would not ask you how to get rid of anxiety immediately. He would ask a different question, slower, more uncomfortable, but more real. What within you has been abandoned enough to have to speak through anxiety? Jung did not believe that anxiety was a simple malfunction that needed fixing. He did not see it as an enemy to be destroyed. To him, anxiety was a signal, a call, a rough form of the soul's language when it has no other way to be heard. When you live for too long on the surface, through roles, through images the world expects, the deeper part of you will find a way to rise up, and anxiety is one of those paths. You may be used to thinking that anxiety comes from the future, from things that have not yet happened, but Jung would say that anxiety often comes from the past, not the past in the sense of clear memories, but parts of experience that were never fully felt, emotions that were swallowed down, pain that was pushed aside because it was not the right time, truths about yourself that you learned to avoid in order to be accepted. You were not born with anxiety. You learned it. You learned to hold your breath when you needed to speak. You learned to smile when you were breaking inside. You learned to be pleasant, obedient, strong, in control of everything. And each of those lessons left a small piece behind. At first, they were silent, but no part of a human being disappears forever. Anxiety begins to appear when those abandoned pieces refuse to stay quiet, when they knock from the inside, not letting you rest, not allowing you to keep living as if everything is fine. And the irony is, the more you try to prove that you are fine, the stronger anxiety becomes, because it does not come to test your endurance. It comes to break a false balance. There is a very specific loneliness that belongs to those who live with anxiety. Not loneliness because there is no one around, but loneliness because no one sees the real battle taking place. You can sit in a room full of people, yet feel as if you are very far away. And in those moments, you begin to doubt yourself. You blame yourself. You ask why you cannot simply be normal like everyone else. Jung would not rush to comfort you by saying that everything will be fine. He would say that maybe things will not be fine if you continue to ignore what is trying to emerge. But there is no threat in that statement, only truth. And the truth is this: anxiety is not a sign that you are failing at life. It is a sign that you are living out of alignment with yourself. There is a part of you that has been forced into silence for too long. There is a need that has never been named. There is a sadness that has never been allowed to exist. And instead of appearing as tears or words, it appears as tension, restlessness, fear without a clear source. Anxiety is the way your soul says, "I'm still here, and I need to be seen." If you feel exhausted from fighting it every day, Perhaps it is because you are fighting in the wrong direction. Perhaps anxiety is not something that needs to be pushed away, but something that needs to be understood. Not with sharp logic, but with slow honesty, a willingness to look inward, even when what you see is uncomfortable. And it is from that very moment, when you stop seeing anxiety as an intruder, that the real story begins. Anxiety never stands alone. It always comes with a very familiar feeling that you rarely name correctly, the feeling of living in the wrong place within your own life. You still do what needs to be done, still fulfill your responsibilities, still maintain a stable image in the eyes of others, but there is a thin, almost invisible distance between you and everything you touch. Joy is never complete. Sadness is never allowed to go all the way through. Every emotion is kept at just the right level so it does not cause trouble, and that very just enough, stretched from day to day, it begins to wear you down from the inside. Carl Jung called this state a separation between the ego that is living and the deeper part of who you are. Not a loud collapse, but a silent crack. You do not notice it right away because you are still functioning well, but inside, something no longer fits, like wearing shoes that are the right size but the wrong shape. You can still walk, but every step makes you a little more tired. Anxiety appears exactly at that crack, not because you think too much, but because a part of you is no longer allowed to participate in the life you are living. Jung believed that the human psyche cannot tolerate prolonged pretending. When the ego tries to maintain control through habits, discipline, and image, the unconscious will find a way to break that false balance, and anxiety is one of the fastest ways. You may feel it at very unexpected moments, when everything seems settled, when there is no danger in sight, when you should be resting, but instead, your heart beats faster, your mind tightens, your body feels like it is preparing to face a threat that does not exist, at least not outside. Jung would say that this threat does not come from the world, but from within. Not something about to happen, but something that has been suppressed for too long. The things you did not allow yourself to feel, did not allow yourself to say, did not allow yourself to admit, they do not disappear. They accumulate. And when the pressure is high enough, anxiety becomes the release valve. There is something very hard to accept here. That anxiety is not always a sign that you are doing something wrong in the present. Sometimes, it is a sign that you have lived too long on a path that is not truly yours. Not completely wrong, just incomplete, not fully reflecting who you really are. You may be used to asking the question, how do I get rid of anxiety? But Jung would turn that question into what within me is being forced into silence. And when that question appears, everything becomes more uncomfortable, but also more real. Because it asks you to look at the parts that are inconvenient, not beautiful, not easy to share. Anxiety, according to Jung, is a sign of an inner conflict, but not a conflict between you and the world. It is between the person you present to the outside and the person you left behind in order to be accepted. This battle has no gunshots, no visible wounds. It takes place in silence, in sleepless nights, in moments when you ask yourself what you are even trying for. You may have felt like you have been playing a role for too long. At first, that role helped you survive. It helped you be liked, be recognized, be safe. But slowly, you forgot what it feels like to take it off. And every time you try to live a little more honestly, anxiety appears like a warning, not because truth is dangerous, but because the ego that is used to control is afraid. Jung believed that within every person exist opposing forces, not good and bad in a moral sense, but different tendencies of life. When you only allow one side to exist, the other side will find a way back through a detour. And anxiety is that detour. It does not directly tell you what needs to change. It only creates the feeling that you cannot continue living the same way. Perhaps that is why anxiety makes you feel out of control. Not because you truly are, but because you are realizing that the control you had before was only a fragile illusion. You controlled by avoiding, by pleasing, by numbing your emotions. And when those strategies stop working, anxiety appears to force you to stop. To stop not to fix yourself, but to listen, not to become stronger, but to become more honest. Jung did not promise that this path would be comfortable. On the contrary, he believed that psychological growth always comes with a certain level of pain, but it is meaningful pain, the pain of awakening, not of meaningless collapse. If you are feeling anxious without understanding why, it may be because a part of you is trying to pull you closer to yourself. not to an ideal version, but to the real one, the version that was set aside for being too sensitive, too different, too unpredictable. And because of that, anxiety is not destroying your life. It is asking a question you have never answered. And that question will lead you even deeper, to the place Jung called the shadow, not the darkness of evil, but the darkness of what has been denied. There, anxiety is no longer a vague feeling. It begins to have shape, a voice, a history, and only when you dare to look into that place does the story truly move to a deeper level. There is a very strange moment when you begin to realize that anxiety is not just a feeling, but a presence. It is no longer vague like mist. It stands there, quietly, as if waiting for you to turn back and look directly at it. And right at this moment, the story begins to turn in a harder direction, but also a truer one. Carl Jung believed that inside every human being exists an underground world, where the parts that are denied do not disappear, but retreat into the dark. You do not see them in daylight, but you feel them at night, when every role is exhausted. That is when anxiety appears most clearly, not to scare you, but to remind you that something has not been lived. You learned how to become a suitable person, suitable for family, suitable for school, suitable for work, for society, for standards that no one truly sat down to ask whether you agreed with or not. And every time you chose to be suitable, another part of you had to step back. At first only a little, an emotion not spoken, a reaction swallowed, a desire pushed aside because it was not the right time. Jung called that part pushed into the dark the shadow, not something evil, but something that was never allowed to exist. The shadow holds both what you fear and what you long for, the anger you did not dare express, the weakness you did not allow yourself to have, even the dreams once dismissed as unrealistic. And when you live too long without turning back to look, the shadow begins to find ways to pull you home. Anxiety is one of the most powerful ways the shadow uses. It does not speak in words. It creates sensation, a feeling of unease, of tension, as if something is wrong even though you cannot find the reason. You may be sitting still, but inside you are not. You may be safe, but your body reacts as if danger is near. That is because the battle is not outside. It is between what you are showing and what you truly are. You may have wondered why you react so strongly to very small things. An offhand comment can make you restless all day. A minor mistake can make you panic as if everything is about to collapse. Jung would say this is not weakness. It is a sign that the shadow is knocking from within, asking to be acknowledged, not to destroy you, but to return. The hardest part is that society does not teach you how to face the shadow. On the contrary, it teaches you to hide it. You are praised for being strong. You are rewarded for controlling your emotions. You are admired for always being positive. But no one teaches you what to do with the parts that do not fit that image. And so you learn to leave yourself behind, little by little. Jung once said that no one can become whole through light alone. But modern life tries to live as if darkness does not exist. And the cost of that denial is anxiety. An anxiety with no face, no clear cause, but persistent and exhausting. It does not let you rest because it has not been allowed to rest. There is a truth that is not easy to hear, that anxiety comes not only from what you have been through, but also from what you did not allow yourself to become. Other versions of you that once wanted to speak, wanted to turn, wanted to live differently, but were shut down out of fear of losing safety. None of that disappears. It waits, and when you no longer have the strength to keep everything neat as before, it begins to rise. If you are listening to this and feel something very familiar, very close, it may be because this story is touching a point inside you. You do not need to do anything big right now. Just allow yourself to stay with that feeling a little longer. If you want, you can leave a line of thought. It does not need to be beautiful, only real. And if you feel that you want to continue on this journey, stay, as a quiet way of saying that you are ready to listen to yourself. Anxiety does not make you broken. It only shows that there is a part of you that refuses to keep living in silence. And when you begin to see it as an invitation rather than a curse, something inside you starts to shift, very slowly, very subtly, but enough to change the direction of the entire story. Because behind anxiety there is not only fear, there are memories, emotions, things that were never spoken, and most importantly, There is a real human being waiting for you to return and recognize them. The path ahead will not lead you out of the darkness right away. It will lead you into it, with open eyes and a slower breath. And from that place, from the deepest point you once avoided, the story will begin to move from anxiety to understanding, from understanding to facing, and from facing to a very different possibility, the possibility of living without having to run away from yourself. When you dare to stay long enough with that uncomfortable feeling, anxiety begins to change its shape. It is no longer a sudden wave that crashes in and pulls away, but becomes a quiet current, seeping into every corner of your body. You realize it does not live only in your head, it lives in your shoulders, always tense as if carrying something without a name. It lives in your stomach, tightening every time you're about to say what you truly think. It lives in your chest, where the breath seems to never complete a full circle. Carl Jung looked at the body in a way that very few dared to. He didn't see it as a biological machine separate from the mind, but as the most honest diary of the unconscious. What you do not allow yourself to feel in words, the body will feel for you. The conflicts you avoid in consciousness will find their way into flesh. Joints, breath, and anxiety, in its physical form, is a vivid record of an inner battle that was never allowed to end. Perhaps you have wondered why your body reacts as if it is in danger, even though your rational mind knows very well that nothing is threatening you. You are sitting still, but your heart races. You are safe, but your nervous system feels ready to run. Jung would say that at this moment, the unconscious has taken control, not to harm you, but because it no longer trusts that your conscious mind is listening. Inside you, there are emotions stuck in very old moments. It may be the fear of abandonment from childhood. It may be anger that was never allowed to exist. It may be sadness that was labeled as weakness. These emotions do not disappear with time. They only lose their language, and when language is gone, they speak through the body, through anxiety. That is why surface solutions rarely reach the root. You can breathe deeply, take cold showers, tell yourself that everything will be fine. All of these can help the body calm down for a moment. But when the disconnection between you and yourself is still there, anxiety will return, not because you used the wrong technique, but because the problem was never about technique. Jung believed that the body is where the unconscious is forced to speak when there is no other path left. An anxious body is a body carrying secrets that were never named, memories that were never allowed to be sad, desires that were never acknowledged as valid. Each symptom is not an enemy, but a message that has not yet been translated. You may have lived for a long time in a state of tension without even noticing it anymore. Your shoulders are always slightly raised. Your jaw is always clenched. Your breath is always shallow. And you call that normal because you no longer remember what true relaxation feels like. Jung would say this is the sign of a long, hidden war, a war without noise, but one that drains your life force every day. Anxiety in the body is not a sign that you are weak. It is a sign that you have been strong for too long in a way that does not belong to you. You braced yourself to fit in. You braced yourself to not cause trouble. You braced yourself to maintain an image, and your body remembered every single time. It does not forget. It only waits until you no longer have the strength to brace yourself. There is a very particular kind of exhaustion that anxiety brings. Not exhaustion from doing too much, but exhaustion from monitoring yourself, monitoring emotions, monitoring reactions, monitoring what is allowed and what is not allowed to appear. Jung understood that this kind of exhaustion cannot be healed by rest alone, because what needs rest is not only the body but the inner battle. When you begin to see anxiety as an expression of the rupture between body and mind, something very important happens. You stop seeing your body as a traitor. You stop being angry at the symptoms. Instead, you become curious about what has been stuck, curious about which emotion was never allowed to complete its journey. Jung never encouraged people to force the body into silence. He believed in listening to sensation without rushing to judge, listening to tension without immediately trying to erase it, because in every point of pain, every tightening, there is a story waiting to be told, not through rushed words, but through patient presence. You may begin to notice that anxiety rises when you're about to do something that is not true to you, when you're about to say something dishonest, when you are about to take on another responsibility you do not want, When you are about to ignore a very real need of your own, the body reacts before you have time to think. It has learned to warn you, because before, no one did. 1. And right here, a subtle shift begins to happen. Anxiety is no longer only something you endure. It becomes a guiding signal. Not always easy to understand, not always clear, but honest. It points to where you are living against yourself, where you are forcing yourself to move against your inner current. The path ahead will not ask you to eliminate anxiety. It will ask you to learn how to be with it, long enough to understand what it is protecting. And when you begin to understand, the battle in the body slowly turns into a dialogue, not peace yet, but a ceasefire. A space where you can breathe a little deeper and listen more clearly to what is calling you from within. From here, the story will no longer speak of anxiety only as a symptom. It will speak of the path Jung believed every human must walk in order to live fully. The path back to a forgotten center, a journey not meant to fix you, but to reclaim what was lost. And on that path, anxiety begins to reveal its true role, not a destroyer, but a guardian at the gate, waiting for you to be brave enough to step through. When you no longer see anxiety as something that must be crushed, but as a signal that needs to be understood, another door begins to open, not loudly, not dramatically, just a very strange feeling, as if you are standing in front of yourself after a long stretch of running away. There is no judgment there, only truth waiting to be seen directly. Carl Jung called this path the journey back to the center. Not the center of control, but the center of wholeness, a place where you are no longer torn between the person you are trying to become and the person you truly are. But to walk this path, you must let go of a very familiar illusion, the illusion that you can live fully without facing the painful parts inside you. Anxiety often appears most strongly when you are standing at the threshold of real change, not external change, like changing jobs or relationships, but inner change, where you can no longer continue pretending. It comes when you realize you are living on autopilot, when the choices you make no longer come from desire, but from fear. Fear of losing safety, fear of being judged, fear of no longer belonging. Basi. Jung believed that every person carries a unique calling within them, a deeply personal direction he called the process of individuation. This is not about becoming special or different in a showy way. It is about becoming true to yourself. And the paradox is that the closer you move toward your real self, the more anxiety may increase at first. Not because you're going the wrong way, but because you are touching old layers that have never been disturbed. You may feel as if you are losing your sense of direction. The things that once made you feel certain no longer work. Old answers no longer calm you. Jung would say this is not a crisis, but a necessary disintegration, like a shell that must crack so new life can emerge. Anxiety appears as pressure from within, forcing that shell to stop holding its old shape. You may feel afraid when you realize you no longer want what was once considered your goal. The things that once drove you now feel empty. And right then, anxiety whispers that you are going off course. But Jung would say that perhaps you are, for the first time, going in the right direction. It is just that this right direction comes without a map, without validation from the outside. One of the hardest things on this journey is learning to distinguish between the voice of fear and the voice of intuition. Anxiety is often mistaken for intuition because both speak through feeling, not logic. But there is a subtle difference. Fear contracts you. Intuition, even when it makes you uneasy, opens a wider space inside. Jung believed that if you listen long enough, this difference will gradually become clear. You will begin to notice that anxiety does not appear everywhere. It appears very selectively. When you're about to turn away from a true value. When you're about to say yes while inside you are screaming no. When you're about to continue a role that has become too tight. Your body reacts before you have time to think. Not to block your path, but to ask you a very simple question. Is this true for you? Jung never encouraged rushing blindly into change. He emphasized awareness. Awareness of motivation, awareness of fear, awareness of the parts resisting inside. The process of individuation is not about destroying everything, but about bringing light into corners that have not been visited for a long time. And anxiety is the signal light showing where that light needs to go. You may have to face emotions you never allowed yourself to fully feel before. Sadness, anger, regret, jealousy, even emptiness. Jung believed that no emotion is wrong. There are only emotions that have not been lived, and emotions that have not been lived will find a way to live anyway, in a more distorted form. Anxiety is one of those forms. On this path, you will not receive much praise. You may even be misunderstood. When you stop pleasing, those who are used to the old version of you may feel uncomfortable, and right then, anxiety appears again, like a final test. It asks whether you trust the truth inside you enough, even when external approval is gone. Jung understood this fear deeply. He knew that people fear being separated from the group, fear being seen as strange. But he also knew that the cost of not living truthfully is far greater. It is a half-lived life, where you exist but are not present, and in that case, anxiety is not the problem, but the consequence. When you begin to walk slowly on the path of individuation, anxiety does not disappear right away, but it changes its role. It is no longer the pursuer, but the reminder. Each time it appears, instead of panicking, you can pause and ask, what am I ignoring? What part of myself am I betraying? That question, though uncomfortable, carries a very different kind of power. Gradually, you realize that anxiety does not want you to return to the old path. It does not want you safe in an empty way. It wants you to live truthfully, even if that requires uncertainty. And within that uncertainty, there is a very deep kind of freedom. Not freedom from fear, but freedom from being ruled by fear. The road ahead is still long, but you are no longer walking in complete darkness. You have begun to see that anxiety is not blocking the way. It stands beside you, like a sign that you are moving closer to where you need to be. And from this point on, the journey will shift into another phase. No longer only about facing, but about learning to listen more deeply, using tools Jung believed the modern world has forgotten. When you have gone far enough that you no longer want to return to the old way of living, but have not yet fully touched peace, a very special pause appears. It is not loud like the early anxiety, and not clear like a decision. It feels like standing between two shores, where you no longer want to pretend, but also do not yet know how to live truthfully. Jung believed that in this pause, the most important thing is not action, but how you listen. The modern world teaches you to react quickly, to have answers, to fix things immediately. But Jung moved in the opposite direction. He believed that there are things in the soul that only reveal themselves when you are slow enough, quiet enough, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of presence, when you stop filling every empty space with noise, with work, with distraction. What was buried begins to rise. You may notice that anxiety softens when you are alone, but not the kind of alone where you pass the time. It is the kind of alone where you are not trying to do anything, not improving yourself, not fixing emotions, just sitting there, breathing, and letting thoughts pass by without being pulled into them. Jung saw this silence as a doorway into the unconscious, not to be swallowed, but to begin a dialogue. In that space, images begin to appear. An old memory suddenly returns with clarity, a recurring dream you once ignored, a familiar feeling you cannot name. Jung called all of these symbols. He believed the unconscious does not speak in logical language, but through images, sensations, fragments that seem disconnected, and anxiety, in the end, is also a symbol of the misalignment between the life you are living and the person you are. You may have dreamed of falling, or being lost, or standing before a door that will not open. Jung would not rush to interpret it by the book. He would ask how you felt in that dream, fearful, regretful, or relieved, because feeling is the key. It tells you what is being suppressed, what is waiting to be released. When you begin to respect this language, anxiety no longer needs to shout through the body. Another tool Jung valued was conscious solitude, not isolating yourself from the world, but creating moments where you are not being watched, not being judged. When no one is observing, the ego relaxes, and when the ego relaxes, the real parts begin to appear. It may be a very old sadness, it may be a restrained desire, it may be a depth of exhaustion you never allowed yourself to admit. Anxiety often eases when you allow these emotions to exist without rushing to fix them. No need to fully understand, no need to explain, just not pushing them away. Jung believed that the most healing thing is not analysis, but permission. permission for emotions to complete their journey, permission for yourself to not know the answers right away. In that permission, the body begins to relax in a very natural way. You may notice that when you stop trying to be fine, a different kind of fine appears. Not a peak of happiness, but an inner quiet, a sense of steadiness, even though nothing outside has changed. Jung called this a sign of reconnection. When you begin to live closer to your center, anxiety is no longer an emergency alarm. It becomes a subtler signal, reminding you when you are drifting away from yourself. Of course, this path is not straight. There are days when everything feels clear. There are days when anxiety returns, as if nothing has progressed. Jung would say this is not failure. It is the natural rhythm of integration. The parts that were abandoned do not trust you right away. They need time to feel safe returning, and each time you do not run, an old layer of defense is removed. You begin to realize that not every thought needs to be believed, and not every feeling needs to be acted on. This distinction is very important. It allows you to not be swept away by anxiety, but also not turn your back on it. You stand in the middle, observing, listening, and from that position, a very different kind of maturity emerges. Not the rigidity of control, but the softness of understanding. Jung believed that when a person learns how to be alone with themselves, without panic, without self-condemnation, a form of inner freedom begins to form. That freedom does not come from everything being resolved, but from no longer fighting what is. And in that state, anxiety is no longer the center of the experience. It is just one part of a larger picture. You may not yet be able to name the new person you are becoming, but you can feel the change clearly. Less tension, less need to prove, less living for external eyes. And from this quiet shift, the final part of the story begins to open, not as a dramatic ending, but as a very gentle return, a place where you no longer need to run, because nothing inside is being abandoned anymore. At some point, you realize you no longer have to try so hard to cope with anxiety. It may still appear, but it no longer occupies all the space inside you, like a cloud passing through the sky instead of covering the entire day. You no longer panic when unease briefly shows up, and you no longer rush to label it or get rid of it. You stay, and that staying changes everything. Carl Jung believed that true healing is not about becoming someone without problems, but about becoming whole. When you have gone deep enough to see the parts that were once denied, when you have allowed the darkness to be present without seeing it as an enemy, a very natural shift occurs. You stop dividing yourself into right and wrong, strong and weak, okay and not okay. You begin to live as a complete human being with everything that you are. There's a very strange feeling when you no longer need to explain yourself to the world. You no longer worry too much about what others think of the path you are on, not because you become cold or distant, but because you have found an inner anchor that is strong enough. Jung called this the self, the deeper self, not something built from external expectations, but from harmony between all parts of who you are. At this point, anxiety is no longer a siren. It becomes a very soft whisper, sometimes just enough to let you know you are drifting too far from yourself. And when you notice, you adjust. No drama, no self-blame, just turning back, the way you return home after a long day. You also begin to clearly feel the difference between living to be accepted and living to be present. Before, you may have measured your worth through other people's eyes, through achievements, through whether you were good enough. But now, those measures no longer control you. You work, love, and choose, not to fill a void, but to express who you truly are. Jung once said that the most dangerous thing is not darkness, but living without knowing who you are, and you have moved beyond that stage, not because you have all the answers, but because you are no longer afraid of the questions. You allow yourself to be uncertain. You allow yourself to change. You allow yourself to grow in directions no one could predict. A very different kind of peace appears when you stop comparing your journey to others. You realize that every person carries a unique story, a unique rhythm, and anxiety, in your story, is no longer a system error. It is a necessary chapter, a chapter that forced you to stop, turn inward, and reclaim what was lost. You begin to live more slowly, not because the world has slowed down, but because you are no longer being pulled by the fear of becoming someone else. Your decisions become quieter, but more solid. You no longer need to explain everything to everyone. You are more selective about who enters your inner space, and you no longer see your differences as something to hide. You may still have tired days, days of doubt. Jung never promised a perfect state that lasts forever, but he believed that when people live closer to their center, they can move through those days without losing themselves. Anxiety, when it appears, no longer drags you into a deep pit. It simply reminds you that you are still alive, still feeling, still on the journey of becoming. And in that moment, you understand something very important. You do not need to prove your worth to the world. You do not need to wear extra masks to be loved. You do not need to shrink the sensitive, deep, different parts inside you. The very things that once made you anxious are the things that make you most alive. The rebirth Jung spoke of is not about becoming a completely new person. It is about returning to who you were before you learned to be afraid, before you learned to suppress, before you believed you had to change to be accepted. And when you reach that point, a very quiet freedom spreads within you. No announcements, no display, just the feeling of being at ease with yourself. You no longer live under constant judgment, whether from others or from yourself. You allow yourself to be wrong, allow yourself to change, allow yourself to be a process in motion. And in that permission, anxiety has nowhere to cling, because no part of you is being abandoned anymore. This is not the end of the journey, but it is the point where you stop running, the point where you stand upright, not to fight, but to be present, the point where you understand that peace does not come from everything being okay, but from no longer turning away from yourself. And when you live from that place, nothing outside can define you anymore, because at last, you have chosen to live as yourself.
Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.